I thought the 12-hour drive from Denver to Sacramento would be worth it when I saw my son Marcus's face light up at his engagement dinner. I had baked his favorite apple pies, wrapped my grandmother's antique engagement ring, and practiced my welcome speech for Sarah. But when Marcus opened his front door that evening, he avoided my eyes and said those crushing words, "Oh, Mom, we had the dinner yesterday. It was just close family." I stood there holding my carefully prepared gifts, watching him fidget uncomfortably. Sarah appeared behind him, smiling politely but coldly. I realized that her wealthy parents had been considered close family, but I hadn't. Something inside me shifted. I smiled sweetly, handed him the pies, and walked away without another word. The hotel room felt suffocating that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at those apple pies I'd spent hours making with Robert's secret recipe. My husband had been gone for 8 months now, and I'd thrown myself into being the perfect mother to Marcus, my only child. Maybe I'd been too perfect, too giving. Robert and I had built a good life together. 35 years of marriage, his successful contracting business, smart investments in rental properties around Denver. When the heart attack took him so suddenly, I'd inherited everything: the house we'd paid off years ago, 4 rental properties bringing in steady income, substantial savings, and a life insurance policy that left me financially secure at 68. Marcus had always been our pride and joy. We'd supported him through college at Colorado State, then graduate school for his business degree. When he struggled to find his footing in Sacramento's competitive job market, I'd helped with rent, car payments, whatever he needed. That's what mothers do, right? The drive to California had been filled with such hope. I'd carefully packed those apple pies in my special carrier, the same one I'd used for every family gathering. The antique engagement ring from my grandmother sat in its velvet box, ready to welcome Sarah into our family. I'd even written down what I wanted to say about love, commitment, and the importance of family traditions. But Marcus's uncomfortable expression when he opened the door should have warned me. His usual warm hug was stiff, perfunctory. When I mentioned the engagement dinner, he'd actually winced before delivering that crushing blow about close family. Close family that somehow included Sarah's parents, whom he'd known for less than a year, but not his own mother, who'd driven 12 hours to celebrate with him. Back in my hotel room, I decided to check my bank statements online. Maybe seeing our solid financial foundation would comfort me, remind me that at least I'd provided security for my son's future. But as the numbers loaded on my laptop screen, my blood ran cold. Unauthorized charges. Lots of them. The emergency credit card I'd given Marcus years ago, the one clearly marked for emergencies only, showed recent activity I didn't recognize. Expensive restaurants in Sacramento, jewelry stores, designer clothing boutiques. The charges went back 3 months, totaling over $8,000. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the transactions. Dinner at Le Bernardin on 5th Street, $347. Tiffany and Company, $1,200. Brooks Brothers, $623. These weren't emergencies. These were the lifestyle expenses of someone trying to impress wealthy people. I tried calling Marcus, but it went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Marcus? Leave a message and I'll get back to you." The same cheerful recording he'd had for years, back when he actually returned my calls promptly. Sleep wouldn't come that night. I kept thinking about Sarah's cold smile, the way she'd stood behind Marcus like a shield. The way they'd both looked relieved when I'd simply walked away instead of asking uncomfortable questions about this sudden change in dinner plans. By morning, I knew this wasn't just about hurt feelings over a missed dinner. This was about a pattern I'd been too blind to see. My son was using me, and I'd made it so easy for him that he didn't even try to hide it anymore. The next morning brought clarity along with my coffee. I decided to do more digging before confronting Marcus about the credit card charges. Something told me this was bigger than unauthorized dinners and designer clothes. I drove to a coffee shop in Marcus's neighborhood, hoping to think through my next steps. The little cafe on J Street was busy with the morning rush, perfect for blending in. I'd just settled into a corner table when I heard a familiar laugh. Sarah sat 3 tables away, her phone pressed to her ear, completely unaware of my presence. Her voice carried clearly in the morning bustle. "Mom, I'm telling you this is going to be perfect," she said, twirling her engagement ring around her finger. The old lady is so desperate to be included in everything. When Marcus told her about missing the dinner, she just stood there looking pathetic with those homemade pies. My coffee turned bitter in my mouth. No, she won't be a problem," Sarah continued. "Marcus says she's loaded. Rental properties, life insurance money, the whole 9 yards. We just need to make her feel guilty enough to start signing things over as wedding gifts. You know how these lonely widows are, they'll do anything to feel needed." I fumbled for my phone, managing to start a voice recording just as Sarah kept talking. "The best part is she thinks Marcus is this successful businessman. She has no idea he's broke and living off her credit cards. When she finds out how much this wedding is going to cost, she'll probably offer to pay for everything just to prove she loves him." My heart pounded so hard I was sure everyone could hear it, but I forced myself to stay still to keep listening. "Trust me, Mom, by the time we're done, she'll have transferred those rental properties to Marcus as a wedding gift. Then after the honeymoon, we can sell them and move somewhere nice. Maybe that house in Napa you were looking at." The recording was still going when Marcus walked into the cafe. He slid into the chair across from Sarah, leaning over to kiss her cheek. I ducked behind my newspaper, praying they wouldn't notice me. "How'd it go with your mom last night?" Sarah asked, lowering her voice slightly. Marcus shrugged. "She looked hurt, but she'll get over it. She always does. I think excluding her from the dinner was smart. Now she'll be extra motivated to prove herself when we start talking about wedding expenses." "Did you see how much she spent on those pies?" Sarah laughed. "She probably drove all day to make them perfect. It's almost sad how hard she tries." "The harder she tries, the more we benefit," Marcus replied coldly. "She's got over $2 million in assets, Sarah. Properties, investments, insurance money. If we play this right, we'll never have to worry about money again." I had to bite my lip to keep from gasping. $2 million. He'd been calculating my net worth, planning to take it all. This wasn't just financial abuse. This was a complete betrayal of everything I thought we had together. "Just remember," Sarah said, gathering her purse, "we need to be subtle about it. Make her think everything is her idea. Lonely old women love feeling like they're being generous and needed." They left the cafe holding hands, laughing about something on Sarah's phone. I sat there for another 20 minutes, making sure they were truly gone before I dared to move. Back in my hotel room, I played the recording 3 times, taking notes. Then I opened my laptop and started checking more than just credit cards. I logged into every account, every investment portfolio, every piece of our financial life that Robert and I had built together. What I found made me physically sick. Marcus hadn't just been using the emergency credit card. He'd somehow gotten access to my personal information and opened 3 additional credit cards in my name. The total debt was over $50,000, and it was all for luxury purchases, fancy dinners, and what looked like deposits for wedding venues. But the worst discovery was yet to come. When I checked my home equity account, I found a loan application I'd never filed. Someone had forged my signature and used my paid-off house as collateral for a $75,000 loan. The money had been transferred directly to an account in Marcus's name just 2 weeks ago. I stared at that forged signature for a long time. It was good, very good. Marcus had been practicing writing my name, studying my handwriting well enough to fool a bank. My son wasn't just stealing from me. He was systematically destroying the financial security that Robert and I had spent decades building, and he was doing it with the cold calculation of a stranger. That's when I realized I needed to stop thinking like a heartbroken mother and start thinking like a survivor, because that's what this had become, a fight for survival. I drove back to Denver the next day, but not in defeat. Every mile of that 12-hour journey was spent planning my next moves. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd made a decision that would have shocked the woman who'd driven to California just days earlier. I was going to play Marcus's game, but I was going to play it better. The first call I made was to Daniel Fitzgerald, the attorney who'd helped me settle Robert's estate. Daniel had been Robert's friend for over 20 years, and I trusted him completely. "Avery, what can I do for you?" Daniel's warm voice was exactly what I needed to hear. "Daniel, I need to see you tomorrow morning. It's urgent and it's about Marcus." Something in my tone must have alarmed him because he cleared his schedule to meet me at 9 o'clock sharp. Daniel's reaction to the evidence was everything I'd expected. He listened quietly as I played Sarah's recorded conversation, showed him the unauthorized credit cards and the forged loan documents. His face grew darker with each revelation. "Avery, this isn't just family drama," he said finally. "This is serious criminal activity. Identity theft, forgery, elder financial abuse. We're talking about federal charges here." "I know," I replied calmly. "But I need your help with something else first. I need to protect my remaining assets, and I need to gather more evidence before we involve law enforcement." Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "What do you have in mind?" "I'm going to make Marcus think he's winning," I explained. "I'm going to be the loving, generous mother he expects me to be. But while I'm doing that, I want you to help me move my assets into protected accounts he can't touch. And I want to hire a private investigator to find out more about Sarah." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled grimly. "You know, Avery, I think Robert would be very proud of how you're handling this." The next step was the hardest part, calling Marcus and pretending everything was normal. "Marcus, honey, it's Mom," I said when he finally answered, putting every ounce of maternal warmth into my voice I could manage. "Oh, hi, Mom. How was your drive back?" "Fine, sweetheart. Listen, I wanted to apologize for being emotional about the dinner. I realized Sarah's parents probably wanted some private time to get to know you better, and I shouldn't have taken it personally." The relief in his voice was obvious. "Thanks, Mom. I was worried you were upset with us." "Of course not, darling. I'm just so excited about the wedding. Sarah seems like such a lovely girl, and I can't wait to welcome her to our family properly." The lies came easier than I'd expected. "Actually, I was hoping I could help with some of the wedding planning. I know these things can be expensive and I'd love to contribute." "Really?" Marcus's voice perked up immediately. "That would be amazing, Mom. There are so many expenses we hadn't planned for." "Well, that's what family is for," I said sweetly. "Why don't you and Sarah make a list of what you need and we can talk about it when I come back to visit next week?" After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a few minutes processing what I'd just done. For the first time in my life, I'd deliberately lied to my son. But as I looked around at the home Robert and I had built together, at the family photos showing Marcus's whole life of love and support, I knew I was fighting for something much bigger than my hurt feelings. Daniel worked quickly to help me protect my assets. We transferred funds into accounts Marcus had never known about, secured my remaining credit lines, and put alerts on all my financial accounts. We also started the process of reporting the identity theft to the credit bureaus, though we agreed to hold off on filing criminal charges until I could gather more evidence. The private investigator Daniel recommended was a woman named Janet Morrison. Janet was in her 50s, a former police detective who specialized in financial crimes. When I met her in Daniel's office, I immediately felt confident in her abilities. "Mrs. Patterson," Janet said, Reviewing the information I'd provided, what you're describing sounds like a romance scam, but with a twist. Usually, these involve strangers meeting online, but your son's fiancé appears to be running a long-term con on your family. What do you mean? Well, think about it. She's identified a target with wealthy family members gotten engaged to gain access to family finances, and she's manipulating both your son and you to maximize the financial benefit. I'd like to do a complete background check on Sarah, including any previous relationships or legal issues. How long will that take? Give me a week. In the meantime, keep playing the supportive mother role. The more confident they become, the more likely they are to make mistakes. That week was one of the longest of my life. I called Marcus every other day, chatting about wedding plans and asking innocent questions about Sarah's family. I researched wedding venues online so I could make knowledgeable comments about their choices. I even started a Pinterest board for mother of the groom outfit ideas. But the hardest part was the nights. Alone in the house I'd shared with Robert, I'd sometimes catch myself wondering if I was overreacting. Maybe Marcus was just immature, not criminal. Maybe Sarah really loved him, and the conversation I'd overheard was taken out of context. Then I'd look at those bank statements again, at that forged signature on the loan documents, and I'd remember that my son had stolen nearly $125,000 from me while I was still grieving his father. By the end of the week, I was ready to hear what Janet had discovered, but nothing could have prepared me for what she'd actually found. Janet Morrison's office felt like something out of a detective movie, with filing cabinets lining the walls and a computer setup that looked like it belonged to the FBI. When she asked me to sit down, her expression told me this was going to be worse than I'd imagined. "Avery, I need you to prepare yourself," Janet said, opening a thick folder. "What I've found about Sarah goes far beyond anything we initially suspected." She spread several documents across her desk like a hand of cards revealing a losing game. First, Sarah Williams isn't her real name. Her legal name is Sandra Michelle Bradley, and she's been using false identities for at least 3 years. My mouth went dry. False identities. Second, and this is the big one, Sandra is already legally married. She wed a man named Thomas Bradley in Las Vegas 2 years ago. That marriage was never dissolved, which means her engagement to Marcus isn't just fraudulent, it's setting him up to be an unwitting participant in bigamy. The room seemed to spin around me. So she can't actually marry Marcus. Not legally, no, but that's not the point of her operation. Janet pulled out more documents. I found records of 2 previous engagements under different names. Both followed the same pattern target: a man with family money get engaged, extract as much cash as possible for wedding expenses, then disappear before any legal ceremony takes place. She showed me photographs of Sarah with different men, different hair colors, different styles of dress. In one, she was a blonde named Rebecca Martinez, engaged to a doctor whose mother had recently inherited a substantial estate. In another, she was a brunette called Amanda Foster, engaged to a real estate developer whose father owned multiple businesses. What happened to those men? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The doctor lost $60,000 in wedding deposits and gifts before Rebecca disappeared. The real estate developer's family lost over $100,000 before they figured out Amanda was a fraud. Both men were devastated not just financially, but emotionally. Neither pressed charges because they were too embarrassed. Janet pulled out another set of documents that made my blood run cold. But here's what really concerns me about your situation, Avery. In both previous cases, Sandra specifically targeted men whose mothers controlled significant family wealth. She's not just running a romance scam on Marcus. She's running a long-term financial manipulation scheme on your entire family. What do you mean? Look at this. Janet showed me printed emails she'd somehow obtained. These are communications between Sandra and an associate, someone who appears to coordinate these operations. They discuss Marcus's inheritance timeline and strategies for accelerating your willingness to transfer assets. The emails were clinical in their coldness, discussing me like I was a business transaction rather than a human being. They mentioned my recent widowhood as an emotional vulnerability to exploit, and my close relationship with Marcus as the primary leverage point. But the most chilling email was the most recent one, dated just 3 days ago. Target is responding well to isolation tactics. Son reports mother is eager to prove her value to the family unit. Recommend accelerating timeline due to her age and potential health complications. If she becomes suspicious or resistant, consider alternative strategies discussed in previous cases. Alternative strategies? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Janet's expression grew grim. In one of the previous cases, when the victim's mother became suspicious about wedding expenses, Sandra convinced her target that his mother was showing signs of dementia. She had him take legal action to gain control of his mother's finances for her own protection. The full scope of what I was facing hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about stolen money or even a fake engagement. This was an organized criminal operation designed to systematically destroy families and steal their life savings. There's more, Janet continued. Sandra appears to be part of a larger network. I found connections to at least 6 other similar operations across California, Nevada, and Arizona. They target recently widowed women with adult children, particularly those children who might be struggling financially or looking for ways to impress new romantic partners. She showed me a chart she'd created mapping out the network. It looked like something from a crime procedural show, with photographs connected by strings showing the relationships between various con artists and their victims. The good news, Janet said, is that you figured this out before they could complete their operation. The bad news is that Marcus is in much deeper than either of us initially realized. What do you mean? Based on these communications, he's not just a naive victim being manipulated by his fiancée. He's an active participant in defrauding you. Some of these emails are actually from his account discussing strategies for getting you to sign over property deeds and liquidate investments. I stared at the evidence spread across Janet's desk, trying to process the magnitude of my son's betrayal. The Marcus I'd raised, the little boy who used to make me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day, the young man who'd cried at his father's funeral, had become someone I didn't recognize. So what do we do now? I asked. Janet smiled grimly. Now we turn the tables. We're going to give Sandra and Marcus exactly what they think they want, but we're going to control every step of the process. And when they think they've won, we're going to spring a trap that will put them both behind bars. How? We're going to plan a wedding, Avery, but it's going to be a very different kind of celebration than they're expecting. As I drove home that evening, I realized that the woman who'd baked apple pies and driven 12 hours to celebrate her son's engagement was gone forever. In her place was someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous to people who preyed on grieving widows. But I also realized something else for the first time since Robert's death. I felt truly alive. I had a purpose that went beyond my grief, beyond my loneliness. I was going to stop these people from destroying other families the way they'd tried to destroy mine. And I was going to make sure Marcus understood that there are consequences for betraying the people who love you most. The next phase required me to become an actress, and I discovered I was better at it than I'd ever imagined. Over the following 2 weeks, I transformed myself into the perfect Mark, the lonely, generous widow desperate to buy her way into her son's happiness. I called Marcus every few days, each time sounding more eager to help with wedding expenses. I gushed about how beautiful Sarah was, how lucky he was to find such a wonderful girl, and how excited I was to finally have a daughter. Each conversation made me feel sick, but I could hear the satisfaction in Marcus's voice as he thought his manipulation was working. Ma, Mom, you're being so generous, he said during one call. Sarah and I were talking, and we think maybe you should come back to Sacramento soon. We'd love to show you some of the wedding venues we're considering. Oh, darling, I'd love that, I replied, putting just the right amount of maternal enthusiasm into my voice. Should I plan to stay for a few days? Maybe I could meet Sarah's parents properly this time. Actually, that's a great idea. Sarah's mom mentioned she'd love to get to know you better. While I was playing the perfect victim on the phone, Janet Morrison was building our case with military precision. She'd connected with FBI agents who specialized in organized fraud schemes, and they were fascinated by the scope of Sandra's operation. The Bureau has been tracking similar networks for months, Janet explained during one of our meetings. Your case could be the key to bringing down a much larger criminal enterprise. But we needed more evidence, particularly documentation of Marcus's active participation in the scheme. That's when Janet suggested something that made my stomach turn. We need you to wear a wire during your next visit to Sacramento, she said. We need recordings of them discussing their plans, particularly any mention of getting you to sign legal documents or transfer property. The idea of secretly recording my own son felt like the ultimate betrayal of motherhood. But then I remembered those emails discussing me like a business transaction, and I knew I had no choice. Daniel helped arrange for the recording equipment through his law enforcement contacts. It was smaller than I'd expected, just a tiny device that clipped inside my blouse, virtually undetectable unless someone was specifically looking for it. But before I could travel to California, Janet made a discovery that changed everything. Avery, I need you to sit down, she said when she called me at home one evening. I found something else about Marcus and Sandra, something that suggests immediate physical danger. My blood turned to ice. What do you mean? I've been monitoring their electronic communications, and there's been a shift in their strategy. They're getting impatient with the timeline, and they're discussing ways to accelerate your willingness to transfer assets. What kind of ways? Janet's voice was grim. They've been researching medications that can cause confusion and memory problems in elderly people. The plan appears to be gradually introducing these substances into your food or drink during visits, then using your resulting confusion as evidence that you need Marcus to take control of your finances for your own protection. The room spun around me. You're saying they want to drug me? Based on the research they've been doing online, yes. They've looked into drugs that can mimic early-stage dementia medications that would make you appear mentally incompetent without causing permanent harm. But why would Marcus go along with something like that? Because Sandra has convinced him it's temporary and harmless. She's told him that once they get control of your assets, they can stop the medication and you'll return to normal. She's convinced him that you'll thank them later for taking care of your finances when you're better. I sat in my kitchen staring out at the garden Robert and I had planted together, trying to process the fact that my own son was planning to poison me. Not to kill me, but to steal my mind, my autonomy, my ability to protect myself. That's when something crystallized inside me, something harder and colder than anything I'd felt before. Marcus wasn't just stealing money anymore. He was willing to steal my sanity, my dignity, my very sense of self. And he was doing it while telling himself he was helping me. Janet. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I want to give them exactly what they want, but I want to control every aspect of how it happens. What do you have in mind? I want to arrange a family dinner in Sacramento. I'll tell Marcus I'm ready to transfer my properties to him as early wedding gifts, and I want to do it with Sarah's parents present so everyone can witness my generosity. That's extremely dangerous, Avery. If they're planning to drug you, they won't have the chance, because you're going to be there and so are the FBI agents. We're going to let them think they've won right up until the moment they realize they've lost everything." Janet was quiet for a long moment. "You understand this means there's no going back. Once we spring this trap, Marcus will face serious federal charges. He could go to prison for years." I thought about that little boy who used to crawl into my lap when he had nightmares, the teenager who'd brought me flowers on Mother's Day, the young man who'd promised to take care of me after his father died. Then I thought about those emails calling me a target, about the forged signatures on loan documents, about the plan to steal my mind along with my money. "He made his choice when he decided to treat me like prey instead of family," I said. "Now he has to live with the consequences." The trap was set for the following weekend. Marcus was expecting his generous, naive mother to arrive in Sacramento ready to sign over her life's work. Instead, he was going to discover that the woman who'd raised him had taught him one final lesson about the importance of choosing your battles wisely. But first, I had to survive a dinner where my own son planned to poison me. The restaurant Marcus chose for our family celebration was perfect for what we had planned, upscale enough to make Sandra's parents comfortable, but with enough ambient noise to provide cover for recording equipment. I arrived 20 minutes early, giving Janet and the FBI agents time to position themselves at nearby tables. Agent Patricia Williams, who'd been coordinating our operation, looked like any other businesswoman enjoying dinner alone. Agent Michael Chen appeared to be on a date with another female agent. They blended seamlessly into the evening crowd, but I knew they were watching every move. I'd spent the afternoon preparing mentally for what was about to happen. Janet had coached me on staying calm, keeping the conversation flowing naturally, and giving Marcus and Sandra enough rope to hang themselves with. Most importantly, she'd taught me how to avoid actually consuming anything they offered me while making it appear that I was eating and drinking normally. Marcus arrived first looking nervous but excited. He kissed my cheek and immediately started talking about how grateful he was that I was willing to help with their future. "Mom, I can't tell you how much this means to us," he said as we waited for the others. "Sarah's parents are so impressed by your generosity. They keep saying how lucky Sarah is to be marrying into such a loving family." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it, but I smiled and patted his hand. "That's what family does, sweetheart. We take care of each other." Sandra arrived with her parents, Janet and David Williams, who seemed like genuinely nice people caught up in their daughter's web of lies. They'd brought a bottle of expensive champagne to celebrate what they believed was my generous gift to the young couple. "Mrs. Patterson," Janet Williams said warmly, "Sandra has told us so much about you. We're so grateful that Marcus found such a wonderful family to join. If only they knew what their daughter really was." Sandra herself was perfectly dressed for the role of loving fiancée, wearing a soft blue dress that made her look younger and more innocent than she was. She hugged me enthusiastically and thanked me repeatedly for being so supportive of their relationship. "I just want Marcus to be happy," I replied, looking directly into her eyes. "Family is everything to me." Marcus had brought the legal documents prepared by what I assumed was a lawyer working with Sandra's criminal network. The papers were designed to transfer my 4 rental properties into Marcus's name as early inheritance gifts to support the establishment of his new household. "I had these prepared by a lawyer friend," Marcus explained, spreading the papers on the table. "It's just a formality, really, but it makes everything official and helps with tax implications." Daniel Fitzgerald had reviewed similar documents the day before. They were technically legal if I'd signed them willingly, but they also contained clauses that would have given Marcus complete control over the properties with no oversight or restrictions. "This is so generous of you," Sandra gushed, leaning over to look at the papers. "Marcus is so lucky to have a mother who believes in supporting young couples." I noticed her purse was positioned strategically next to my water glass. Janet had warned me to watch for opportunities for Sandra to introduce substances into my food or drink. This was probably their moment. Should we order dinner first? I suggested, moving my water glass to the other side of my plate. I'm so excited to celebrate, but I'm also quite hungry after the drive. We ordered, and as our meals arrived, I watched Marcus and Sandra exchange meaningful glances. When Sandra excused herself to the restroom, I saw her brush against my wine glass as she stood up. By the time she returned, I'd switched my glass with Marcus's, something Janet had taught me to do smoothly during our practice sessions. "So, Mrs. Patterson," David Williams said as we began eating, "Sandra tells us you're planning to liquidate some investments to help with wedding expenses as well. That's incredibly generous." "Well," I replied, taking a small bite of salad while watching Marcus sip from what had been my wine glass, "I believe in investing in love. Robert and I had such a wonderful marriage, and I want Marcus and Sandra to have that same foundation of security." Marcus was beginning to look slightly drowsy, which confirmed Janet's suspicions about their drugging plan. Sandra kept glancing at me expectantly, probably waiting for signs of confusion or disorientation that should have been appearing by now. "You know," Sandra said carefully, "Marcus mentioned that you've been having some trouble keeping track of financial details lately. Are you sure you're feeling clear-headed enough to make such important decisions tonight?" It was a set-up question designed to establish my supposed mental confusion for the others at the table. Instead, I smiled brightly and pulled out my phone. "Actually, I'm feeling wonderfully clear tonight," I said. "In fact, I've been thinking about this so much that I decided to invite a few other people to witness this generous gift. I hope you don't mind." Sandra's face went pale. "Other people?" "My attorney Daniel Fitzgerald and my financial advisor Janet Morrison. They should be here any minute. I thought it would be good to have professional witnesses for such an important family moment." Marcus tried to sit up straighter, fighting whatever drug Sandra had intended for me. "Mom, I don't think we need—" "Oh, here they are now," I said as Daniel and Janet approached our table, followed by Agents Williams and Chen. "Good evening, everyone," Daniel said formally. "I'm Daniel Fitzgerald, Mrs. Patterson's attorney, and this is Janet Morrison, her financial advisor." Agent Williams stepped forward, her badge now visible. "I'm Agent Patricia Williams with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and this is Agent Michael Chen. Sandra Bradley, you're under arrest for identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse." The table erupted in chaos. Sandra's parents looked stunned and horrified. Marcus tried to stand but stumbled, still affected by whatever drug he'd unknowingly consumed. Sandra herself went absolutely white, then tried to run. She didn't get far. Agent Chen was already positioned to intercept her. "Marcus Patterson." Agent Williams continued, "You're also under arrest for identity theft, forgery, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse and attempted poisoning of an elderly person." "Mom," Marcus said, his voice slurred but desperate. "What's happening? What's going on?" I looked at my son, this young man I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, and felt something inside me finally break clean in two. "What's going on, Marcus, is that I know everything," I said quietly. "I know about the credit cards, the forged loan documents, the fake engagement, and the plan to drug me tonight to make me appear mentally incompetent." His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, denial, fear, and finally a kind of desperate anger. "You don't understand," he said. "Sarah loves me. This was all going to work out. You were going to be fine." I have recordings of her calling me a pathetic old lady, Marcus. I have emails discussing the best ways to steal my money and my sanity. I know that she's already married to someone else, and that you're the third man she's pulled this scam on. Sandra's parents were crying now, holding each other as they realized their daughter was not who they thought she was. Mrs. Williams kept saying, "I don't understand," over and over. As the FBI agents led Marcus and Sandra away in handcuffs, Marcus looked back at me one more time. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, and for just a moment he sounded like the little boy who used to apologize for breaking my favorite vase. "I know you are, sweetheart," I replied, "but sorry doesn't fix what you've done." The legal proceedings took 8 months to resolve, completely 8 months, during which I had to rebuild not just my financial security, but my entire understanding of family trust and forgiveness. Marcus and Sandra were charged with multiple federal crimes. The evidence Janet and I had gathered, combined with what the FBI discovered about their broader criminal network, painted a picture of systematic fraud that had victimized dozens of families across multiple states. Sandra, whose real name turned out to be Sandra Michelle Bradley, received 15 years in federal prison. The judge noted that her operation had caused not just financial harm, but severe emotional trauma to elderly victims and their families. She showed no remorse during sentencing, maintaining that she was simply helping people make better financial decisions. Marcus's case was more complex. His attorney argued that he'd been manipulated by Sandra, that he genuinely believed their relationship was real, and that the financial arrangements were temporary. But the evidence was overwhelming: emails showing his active participation in planning my exploitation, his research into medications that could cause cognitive impairment, and his willing participation in forging legal documents. He ultimately pleaded guilty to elder financial abuse, identity theft, and conspiracy charges. He received 12 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 8 years if he completed addiction counseling and made full financial restitution. The financial recovery process was surprisingly successful. Daniel managed to recover most of the stolen funds through insurance claims and asset seizures. The house Marcus had used as collateral was returned to my ownership after the fraudulent loan was voided. Even better, the FBI's investigation led them to other victims of the same network, and several additional properties and bank accounts were discovered and distributed among the various victims. But the most unexpected development came from Sandra's parents. David and Janet Williams were devastated when they learned the truth about their daughter. They genuinely believed she was engaged to a successful businessman from a loving family, and they'd been planning their own generous contributions to the wedding. "Mrs. Patterson," Janet Williams said, when she called me 3 weeks after the arrests, "we know there's nothing we can say to undo what Sandra did to you and your family, but David and I would like to contribute to your financial recovery if you'll let us." They discovered that Sandra had stolen money from them too, using their credit cards to finance her lifestyle while she'd been running the con on Marcus and me. They wanted to donate their recovered funds to help other elderly fraud victims. "That's very generous," I told her, "but what I'd really like is your help starting a support group for families who've been through what we've experienced." That support group became one of the most meaningful parts of my recovery. We met twice a month in the conference room at Daniel's law office, bringing together elderly victims of financial fraud and their family members. Some stories were similar to mine, but others involved different types of scams: fake charities, romance scams, investment frauds, and home repair cons. What we all had in common was the feeling that we should have known better, that we should have seen the signs earlier. But working together, we learned to recognize that being trusting isn't a character flaw, and that criminals are skilled at exploiting our best instincts rather than our worst ones. 6 months after the arrests, I received my first letter from Marcus. Prison had apparently given him time to think about what he'd done, and the addiction counseling had helped him understand how his relationship with money and entitlement had contributed to his choices. "Mom," he wrote, "I know there's nothing I can say to excuse what I did to you. For months I kept telling myself that I was just borrowing money, that everything would work out once Sarah and I got married and settled down. But I know now that I was lying to myself as much as I was lying to you." The letter went on for several pages, detailing his recognition of how Sandra had manipulated him, but also acknowledging his own responsibility for the choices he'd made. He'd apparently learned about the support group I'd started and wanted to contribute somehow, even from prison. "I've been thinking about writing letters to other families who've been through similar situations," he continued. "Not to excuse what people like me did, but to help them understand how these scams work from the inside. Maybe if other people understand how the manipulation happens, they can protect themselves better." I didn't respond to that first letter immediately. I needed time to process my feelings, to separate my love for the child he'd been from my anger at the man he'd become. But eventually I did write back. Not to forgive him, not yet, but to let him know that I was willing to consider the possibility of healing if he was truly committed to making amends. "Actions have consequences, Marcus," I wrote. "But consequences can also be the beginning of redemption if you're willing to do the hard work of earning it." A year after the arrests, my life had taken on a new shape that surprised me. The support group had grown into a nonprofit organization that provided education and assistance to elderly fraud victims throughout Colorado. Janet Morrison had left her private investigation business to become our full-time director, and we'd helped over 200 families recover from various types of financial fraud. I'd also started dating again, something I never thought I'd be ready for. James Morrison. No relation to Janet, was a retired high school teacher whose wife had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. We'd met at a grief support group, and our relationship had grown slowly and carefully, built on mutual respect and shared experiences rather than desperate loneliness or financial calculation. James understood about complicated family relationships. His own daughter lived in Florida and rarely called something that had hurt him deeply until he learned to find fulfillment in chosen family rather than biological obligation. "The people who truly love you," he said one evening as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset, "are the ones who show up for you consistently, not just when they need something." 2 years after that terrible night in Sacramento, I received another letter from Marcus. This one was different, shorter, more focused, and accompanied by a certificate showing he'd completed his GED and was enrolled in a substance abuse counseling program that would allow him to help other inmates when he was released. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he wrote, "but I want you to know that I'm trying to become the kind of person who deserves a second chance, even if that chance never comes." I did visit him eventually, not because I'd forgiven him completely, but because I needed to see for myself whether his remorse was genuine or just another manipulation. The young man I met in the prison visiting room was thinner, older looking, but somehow more genuine than the Marcus I'd known before his arrest. Prison had stripped away the entitlement and superficial charm, leaving someone who seemed for the first time in years to be telling the truth about himself. "I think about what I put you through every day," he said quietly. "Not just the money, but the betrayal. You spent your whole life taking care of me, and I repaid you by treating you like prey." We talked for 2 hours that first visit, not about forgiveness or reconciliation, but about accountability and growth. Marcus had apparently spent considerable time thinking about why he'd been so susceptible to Sandra's manipulation, and he'd identified patterns of entitlement and selfishness that went back to his teenage years. "I always thought I deserved things without earning them," he admitted. College, graduate school, a comfortable lifestyle, respect from successful people like Sarah's parents. I never learned the difference between what I wanted and what I'd actually worked for. As I drove home from that visit, I realized that while I might never trust Marcus completely again, I could respect the work he was doing to understand himself. That was more than Sandra had ever offered, more than most criminals ever achieved. The support group continued to grow and evolve. We'd helped establish similar programs in 6 other states, and our educational materials were being used by law enforcement agencies to train officers about elder fraud prevention. My story, painful as it was, had become a tool for protecting other families from similar exploitation. But perhaps the most important lesson I'd learned was about the difference between enabling and loving. For years, I'd thought that being a good mother meant protecting Marcus from consequences, providing financial support whenever he struggled, and accepting his explanations for his problems without question. Now I understood that real love sometimes requires allowing people to face the results of their choices, even when those consequences are painful. Especially when those consequences are painful. 3 years after that devastating engagement dinner, I could honestly say I was happier than I'd been since Robert's death. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because I'd learned to find meaning in it. My betrayal had become the foundation for helping others avoid similar harm. My broken trust had taught me to value the relationships built on honesty and mutual respect. And perhaps most importantly, I'd discovered that my worth wasn't determined by my usefulness to other people. I didn't need to buy love or acceptance through financial generosity. The people who truly valued me did so for my wisdom, my strength, and my capacity for growth, not for my bank account. As I write this story, Marcus has served 4 years of his sentence. We correspond regularly now, and our relationship has slowly evolved into something more honest than it ever was before his arrest. He'll never live in my house again, and I'll never give him access to my finances, but there's a possibility that someday we might rebuild some kind of family bond based on truth rather than manipulation. Sandra, on the other hand, continues to maintain her innocence and has shown no interest in rehabilitation. According to Janet Morrison, she's spent her time in prison trying to recruit other inmates into various schemes, apparently unable to conceive of any lifestyle that doesn't involve exploiting other people. The difference between them taught me something important about forgiveness. It's not about excusing harmful behavior or pretending betrayal didn't happen. It's about recognizing genuine remorse and supporting real efforts to change while protecting yourself from people who see your compassion as weakness to be exploited. If you've made it this far in my story, you probably recognize some of these patterns in your own life or the lives of people you love. Maybe you've been taken advantage of by family members, or maybe you've watched elderly relatives make financial decisions that seemed influenced by emotional manipulation. The most important thing I can tell you is this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, if someone's behavior doesn't match their words, if you're being pressured to make financial decisions quickly or secretly, step back and get independent advice. There's no shame in being cautious, and there's no generosity in enabling people to harm themselves or others. Setting boundaries with people you love isn't cruel, it's essential. Teaching consequences isn't punishment, it's education. And protecting your own resources and well-being isn't selfish, it's responsible. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone is refuse to participate in their destructive patterns. Sometimes the most loving response is to say no, even when it's difficult, even when it disappoints people, even when it changes relationships forever. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone you loved was taking advantage of your generosity? How did you handle it? And what did you learn about the difference between helping and enabling? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video to help other families who might be facing similar challenges find it. And please subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming life's unexpected betrayals and finding strength in the most difficult circumstances. Don't forget to share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of financial boundaries and family accountability. Sometimes the stories that are hardest to tell are the ones that most need to be heard. Thank you for listening to my journey from victim to survivor to advocate. Remember that your worth isn't determined by what you can provide for others, but by who you choose to be when life tests your strength. Take care of yourselves, protect your hearts and your resources wisely, and never be afraid to choose your own well-being over someone else's comfort. Until next time, stay strong, stay smart, and remember that it's never too late to learn the difference between love and manipulation.